Here we go. I would like to thank you for inviting me today. I'm excited to share the information that I have garnered from my research on the first light on archaic petroglyphs in East Central Utah as solstice markers. I would like to begin by thanking Dr. McKim Malville for supervising this research, Dr. Erica Ellingson and Dr. Fabio Silva as editors of the paper, and also the Lionel Sims Award. And I would also like to express my appreciation to the Native American peoples that have lived and are currently living in this area of the Southwest and serve as an inspiration for us. I wanted to start this slideshow by sharing with you the moment of inspiration. So this is the solstice sunrise as observed from a petroglyph site in Castle Valley. I think many of you will probably recognize the horizon line here. This research was designed to test the frequency with which petroglyphs were placed in the landscape to witness first or last light during solstice horizon events, sunrise or sunsets, by nomadic hunter-gatherer groups. While the Barbers contended that hunter-gatherer peoples had no need for tracking time or astronomical events, this research quantifies the potential value placed on solar tracking by pre-agricultural groups. Results showed a significant increase in petroglyph sites located to witness first light on winter solstice sunrise. Both pragmatic and spiritual reasons for the tracking of solstices among hunter-gatherers are considered. This presentation begins with a brief literature review, some information about the study area and rock art definitions, followed by the study design and results. It's hard to find documented hunter-gatherer solstice sites. This may be changing in the near future as more information comes from the Göbekli Tepe site and associated sites in Anatolia, Turkey, which were dated between 9600 and 8000 BC. And also the Nabta Playa site that Dr. Malville has documented, which was inhabited at least part of the year by semi-nomadic pastoralists. And that site, you can see in the upper photograph here, is 5500 to 4200 BC and tracked solstices as well as some star risings. The hunter-gatherer solstice documentation that is closer to the study area are the Chumash of Santa Barbara, who were a hunter-gatherer group which were sedentary. The abundance of the California coast made it possible for them to stay in one place, and they had solstice observations up until the time of contact with researchers. Other California solstice observations were noted among hunter-gatherers, but there's no ethnology directly in the study area that goes back to the archaic times. So I have tried to use ethnology from some of these other sites. What is documented in the Southwest are a number of agriculturalist sites where petroglyphs have been used as back sites. In South Mountain, Arizona, the Hohokam between 100 and 1450 AD have been documented by Bostwick as using petroglyphs as back sites. And the 4 sites on the horizon were often mountain peaks. In Chaco Canyon, Malville has documented, as you can see in the photos here, the solstice sunrise, the winter solstice sunrise over Fajada Butte, as seen from Marcia's Rincon, Great Kiva. And that site was created between 700 and 1300 AD. Hovenweep is also documented as having astronomical alignments and ways to mark the solstice between the buildings. And Hopi horizon calendars were documented by Ellis in historical times as well. The ethnology of the hunter-gatherers has disappeared. Of course, we have no language, we have no history from the archaic groups that lived in the Southwest. And so I have used some of the most ubiquitous concepts to contextualize the information about how the archaic groups may have felt about solstices or why they may have been important to them. And the first concept I have used is animism, which of course was developed by E.B. Tyler and considered a first step in religious thought among all groups. And it is according to Tyler, it's the propensity to project human characteristics of life, thought, and feeling onto the natural world. I like the Greek origin of animodus, or animated, which means windy. It's related to wind. And being a member of the community of the Southwest, that has a lot of meaning to me. A more nuanced understanding of hunter-gatherer perceptions are relational ontologies. And Dr. Malville has done a lot of work with this. It makes a lot of sense that if the framework for thinking about your environment was based on a community or family unit, because they didn't have larger social structures, their relationship with everything in the environment would be similar to that of a family, where you have obligations to everyone in the environment or in the family. And so the relational ontology includes a sense of interrelatedness where you give and take with all the members of that community. The third concept I've tapped into is shamanism. And if the community recognizes unseen beings or non-human persons, then those members of the community that are particularly skilled with visions or dreams or sensitivity to those beings would naturally become the specialists that work with them. And so it follows that animism, relational ontologies would foster shamanism, where specialists would develop to work with those beings that aren't necessarily obvious to everyone. So moving on to the study area, most of you will be familiar with this map. This is a Google Earth rendition of the Four Corners area. In the top up here, you can see the study area. It is centered on Delicate Arch in Arches National Park with a 35-kilometer radius around it. And it includes the Colorado River, it includes Moab, Castle Valley, and Thompson Springs. So Sago Canyon is also in this study area. As you can see, there's a lot of red and there's green. So the mountainous areas are green, and this particular area has had that diversity of both the La Salle Mountains and the deserts, as well as the riparian areas, which have been very beneficial for hunter-gatherer groups, but also supported at sometime the agricultural area, the raising of corn in this area. The red rock deserts around here look like this. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Wingate vertical cliffs. This is about 700 meters high, and frequently the petroglyphs in this area are found right along the talus, where the talus meets the cliff. And this darker area is what is known as desert varnish and plays a key role in this study. So that is frequently where the petroglyphs are found in this area. The geology of the area is primarily these sedentary sandstones that formed during the Jurassic and Triassic eras, below which is a large basin of the paradox salt layer, a semi-fluid layer up to 4 kilometers thick. Within the study area are 4 collapsed salt valleys oriented from southeast to northwest. It's Castle Valley, Onion, the Moab Valley, and Salt Valley. The reason this is of concern in this particular study is because I have been looking for the natural low points on the horizon as the focus of where the first light would come through. And because of the orientation of these valleys, I was concerned that it would favor views to the southeast, which would be winter solstice sunrise, and to the northwest, which is summer solstice sunset. So in the study, I'll explain how I tried to isolate this phenomena to see if it was affecting the results. Here's a little bit closer view of the study area, which is the red circle here. These lines extending from it are the angles at which the summer solstice sunrise can be viewed. This red line is at 58 degrees. Almost all of the petroglyphs in this area were at between 38 and 39 degrees latitude. Only the Thompson Springs area had any sites above 39 degrees. So at 0 degrees horizon, 58 azimuth is the summer solstice sunrise. The winter solstice sunrise is 120, and the winter solstice sunset at 0 degrees altitude is 239, and the summer solstice sunset is 301. Of course, that changes with the horizon, and Canyonlands is, of course notorious for having great differences in the horizon here. So within the study area, it became a question of cultural affiliation, and it has kind of been a meeting area for different groups. Of course, the much of the prehistory begins with the Clovis culture. That may soon be changing due to the footprints found in white sands discussed by Hartley and others. But for the moment, let me just say that Clovis culture is considered to be fairly ubiquitous across the southern US, and there is definitive evidence of Clovis having used quarries in this area of the study area. The archaic hunter-gatherer groups developed from the Clovis population and began to use wild seeds and other plants as the megafauna died off, and also began hunting smaller game. And the millstone was introduced, and basketry was another major tool of the archaic population. They were very scattered. I've heard very broad ranges of how dispersed they were. And the groups were, for the most part, described as being less than 25 people of usually an extended family. And they are considered to have ranged broadly because in this area they were following the pine nut harvest, which is not at its best in every range every year. So they would move from Mesa Verde down towards Four Corners and up to the La Salles, depending on where the best pinyon harvest would be. And this is important for the petroglyphs because it was too broad a range for the people, the archaic peoples, to have known every rock in the area and known where to stand to see a solstice sunrise, because they may have even considered this entire area as their home. The study area is considered to have been depopulated between 600 and 900 AD. And then the area had both the ancestral Pueblans, who were, of course, centered around Chaco down here, and heavily used Mesa Verde area and the San Juan River for the cultivation of corn. The architecture of the ancestral Pueblans, the unit pueblos, the Pruden units, start to diminish around the top of this chart. Paradox Valley had a Pruden unit, and Beef Basin at the bottom of Canyonlands Needles District are about the last of that kind of surface masonry. And there is considered to have been ancestral Pueblans in the Moab area that were using pit houses. Charles and Cole also discussed the basket maker one in the area from about 400 BC to 460. And they say the earliest corn discovered in Moab was 138 AD. In this area, Francis Smiley has, for Black Mesa, determined that corn was in that area for over 1,000 years before surface masonry evolved. And the unfired ceramics in the Moab area have also led me to side with those archaeologists who feel that a hunter-gatherer's lifestyle was maintained in this area until the Chaco expansion between 900 and 1150. The Fremont were also in this area, mostly around Green River, and this area is considered to be part of the southern San Rafael Fremont area. Some of that trickled into the Needles District. Earlier archaeologists said that the Colorado River was a dividing line between the two groups who were currently in the study area. Others have determined that it was more of an interfingering, and Carol Patterson has done some research defining the Fremont as a Caris-speaking group that settled the area coming through Colorado and down into this area, and that they were essentially also of Mesoamerican descent who tried to farm this entire area for several hundred years before hunter-gatherers of the Ute nation moved into the area and were more successful as hunter-gatherers than the corn agriculture that they had been pursuing in this area, which is why around 1150, both the Fremont and ancestral Pueblans retreated from this area. Most archaeologists, including Black and others, and Tips in Needles, Black did his pedestrian studies in Lisbon Valley, and he said that the AAP presence there was very limited and very short term. Tip said that that group pursued seasonal agriculture by planting in the spring, hunting and gathering all summer, and then returning in the fall to see what was left by the animals, essentially. And Pearson of Moab also concluded that he felt the agriculturalists in the Moab area, for the most part, had to supplement corn agriculture with hunting and gathering, because this area is somewhat marginal. It's hard to get 120 days frost-free. Moab is probably much better. On the north side of the La Salle's, cold drafts come down, and the water, we do not have 370 millimeters of rainfall, so it would have had to been supplemented also with tributaries or something else. You can't do dry land farming in Moab. The area was subsequently inhabited between 1200 and 1880 by the Ute Indians, who were also hunter-gatherers. So the reason I've gone into some of this detail is because I have used this AP and Fremont occupation during the Chaco expansion as the most likely period for sedentary agriculturalists to be in the area. And because it is fairly limited by time, I have taken petroglyph panels that include AP and Fremont elements. And if there are much older petroglyphs based on weathering and repatination, I consider those to be archaic or hunter-gatherer in origin. So I'm using the AP and Fremont as a timestamp. Just briefly, I'm sure you're all familiar with this information. Petroglyphs are pecked, abraded, or scratched, and the pictographs are painted on with pigments. The issue with pictographs in this study is that they are so vulnerable to erosion that they primarily are found either on cave ceilings or they're found on north-facing walls. This is the Bartlett panel. This is on a north-facing wall. Anything that has exposure to the strong winds from the south has probably eroded away. And because I am trying to find the geographic location of the original rock art, I have excluded pictographs from the study, with the exception of panels that include both petroglyphs and pictographs. Of course, dating has been somewhat more successful with pictographs, especially if there's organic binders in the pigments that could be radiocarbon dated. Obviously, that requires some disruption of the panels and was out of the question. There are no organic elements in petroglyphs, which makes it much harder to date them. There are some methods being developed these days with the microlamentation. The varnish microlamentation has been analyzed. It is not something that I was in a position to apply to the 203 sites that I visited. And the other one is X-ray fluorescence, which is probably more useful also with pictographs to determine the source of the pigments that were used. So the styles that are represented in the area will probably be familiar to most of you, the Barrier Canyon styles. This panel is in Sago Canyon. As I said, they are found in north-facing locations. Some of these are up to or greater than 150 centimeters, and the positional sample skewing is why they have not been used. Now, as far as petroglyphs are concerned, there are several different eras in the area, and I'll start with the youngest ones and move backwards in time. So the Ute petroglyphs are from 1200 to 1880 AD, or potentially even later, include historical elements such as men riding horses, as you find here. And you can also see that the pecking has left an underlying layer of sandstone that does not have the varnish on top. And there's a lot of contrast, and this pecked area is very bright. So these are the youngest petroglyphs that were found in this study. And anything that is considered Ute or had historical elements was also not part of my test sample because it expanded the time too long. I wanted to cut it off with the last of the AP or Fremont. The ancestral Puebloan petroglyphs, so this was an agriculturalist group. In the study area between 900 and 1150 AD, possibly 1280 according to Bretternitz. Characterized by large anthropomorphs, solidly pecked. This one is about 2 meters tall. The rock art is roughly 1,000 years old, and you can see there's some signs of oxidation here. And this has darkened over time, especially compared to these Ute petroglyphs. The AP panels are abundant in the study area and frequently found superimposed over older elements. And this was the criteria for selecting test samples. So if there were either Fremont or ancestral Puebloan petroglyphs on a panel that included older, much older petroglyphs as well, then I could safely assume that the older petroglyphs had belonged to a hunter-gatherer group. So here's a sample of the Fremont rock art in the area. Again, you can see that some oxidation has occurred here. These are younger ones down here. On the side were some much more repatinated. So they had the desert varnish filling in the pecked areas. The Fremont mixed agriculture with hunter-gatherer strategies. They were also in the study area from 900 to 1150 AD. Typical of the Fremont are the necklaces and the earrings, the ornamentation. Also, the trapezoidal bodies you see here are classic of that. This anthropomorph is about 1 meter tall. And the classic explanation was that the Fremont were north of the Colorado River. This panel is actually found in Mill Creek, which is south of the Colorado River, and is pretty good evidence for the argument that there was actually intermingling of the two groups. The archaic petroglyphs, this is one right here. And this is a case where you can see that the desert varnish has almost completely refilled in all these pecked spaces. This is quite unusual. It takes thousands of years, according to Dorn and Whitley, for these pecked areas to refill with varnish. Whitley considered anything that had the varnish filling it back in again to be at least 2,000 years old. He argued also that petroglyphs that were still not completely varnished, I believe in the Mojave area, were over 10,000 years old. So this may, in fact, be quite old. The archaic people were hunter-gatherers in the study area from 5,000 BC to about 600 AD. According to one of the early archaeological studies of this area, Alice Hunt concluded that 90% of the sites she found were archaic campsites in the La Salle Mountains. And she believed that they continued to live and prosper in the backcountry, so to speak, even as agriculturalists may have settled pockets in and around them in the valleys. This element, I have been calling each figure an element. I also am, for the purposes of quantification, I have listed anything that is where the elements have a space of more than 2 meters between them is a different panel. If it's on a different face of the rock, it's also a different panel. But a site will have 10 meters between them, because the purpose of this research was to count how many of these sites were witnessing solstice sunrises. Many of these archaic elements are severely eroded. Often it's difficult to even conceptualize what they may have portrayed. A lot of them are half buried or very high up on the cliff, indicating that the soil levels have changed since they were created. Archaic panels are found throughout the study area, and anything that had this level of repatination in contrast to newer ones was considered archaic. 2 sites have what I consider a Western abstract tradition, also known as Great Basin abstract style, characterized by curvilinear, meandering lines that cover most of the surface. And this is considered one of the very early types of petroglyphs in the Southwest. This panel is not completely repatinated, so each panel, depending on its environmental conditions, will repatinate at a different rate. So when I talk about comparing the repatination levels, it's always within one panel to restrict what changes might have occurred due to the different environmental conditions. So only 2 of these panels were found, and they were included just based on their style. In every other instance, I was not using style as a criteria because it is the area has had so much traffic from different groups, and they use often the same representation of bighorn or deer, and it was very difficult to discern according to stylistic criteria what the panel might be attributed to. So I have relied on the timestamp of the ancestral Pueblans and the Fremont, and anything that's clearly much older than that was considered archaic, or at least belonging to hunter-gatherers. There were 2 sites also with cupules, and fortunately both of these sites had petroglyphs, and I could decide on their criteria for the test based on the petroglyphs and not the cupules. These cupules may be related to making sound. I'm not sure they had the same purpose as petroglyphs. But 2 of these sites were found in the study area. So the repatination that I have been looking for, in which I was able to classify these sites as having originally been chosen by hunter-gatherer peoples, was to look at where they're most eroded, where they're most repatinated. And what I've done here is illustrated starting with the lime green. This figure right here is very hard to see just as in the rock. So I have sort of colored it in. The lime green are what I consider to be the oldest and most repatinated figures. There's what may even be a bison here, I'm not sure. And then going through the spectrum, these teal green, teal blue, bright blue, dark blue, and then the most bright and repatinate or recent element on this panel is this magenta bighorn. So I used photography to analyze the sites to at least determine if there were multiple layers of repatination. I have also used D-Stretch, which is primarily a tool for pulling out more colors in the pictographs. As you saw earlier, the intestine man was a D-Stretch enhanced image of that pictograph. But I also found it valuable to use D-Stretch with an inversion that an inversion of the colors, and then use a number of their filters to determine which were where it made it more obvious where the levels of repatination had were visible using D-Stretch. So even though it's a great tool for pictographs, I was able to also use it as a tool for analyzing these panels. Once you have petroglyphs, there are two ways of understanding whether it has a relationship to the solstice. And the first is indirect observation, shadow and light. One example of that is the sun dagger, the so-called sun dagger at Fajada Butte. Here is what may be one in the study area. I've outlined in green the petroglyph, and it's referred to as I see the light. So this photo was taken during solstice sunrise, and a boulder in front of this petroglyph casts this shadow which crosses the eye of the elk or deer. And so it is a representation that is considered intersecting with the light and shadow that refers to I see the light of the summer solstice. And this pattern would only occur at sunrise on the solstice. It took 45 minutes later for this same line to go down. This petroglyph is off to the right and lower than this one. It's scratched, which is unusual in this area, but it appears to be a rising sun motif. It is actually 45 minutes after the sun has risen that this line dissects here. And one of the issues with using indirect observations is the Fajada Butte site, for example, occurs at 11 o'clock in the morning. And other sites I'm aware of, like Hovenweep, occurs around 9 o'clock in the morning in the summer. So those are not necessarily coordinated with sunrise or sunset. And you have to be there to watch it all day long. So I was unable to use this type of site in my recording and test sample. So what I did rely on is direct observation. And what these sites mean to me is simply stand here. I have not done any research into the meaning of the elements or which figures are on the petroglyph panels. I simply stood in front of each of the petroglyph panels at the most reasonable spot. I'll discuss that in a moment, and used it as a backsite. And then the view from that panel, from this panel, is where the lowest point, and I'll discuss that in a moment, but the lowest point in this case was where this cliff meets the valley below. And this was about 120 degrees or 123 degrees. I think it's like 3 degrees altitude or something. But this is where the winter solstice sun would rise. And so this is what I was looking for. Based on that initial observation of the summer solstice sunrise in Castle Valley, I went to various petroglyph sites, and my paper says I stood 2 meters in front of it. Well, this cliff is, or this talus slope is about 60 degrees. So 2 meters in front of it would have put me a good way down the cliff. So I stood where it was possible. I'm using a Sunoto tandem clinometer and compass and measuring the altitude and azimuth. Generally, it was obvious where the 2 lowest points in the horizon were. Some of the sites I ended up taking 5 measurements. I tried to visit all the rock art sites in the area. I'm aware of 2 or 3 that I still haven't gotten to, but I did visit 203 sites, and I was able to take measurements at all of those, including an additional 28 sites that I listed as controls. I measured the low points and then selected the palimpsest panels with multiple levels of repatination as the test group. I modeled the solstice, sunrise, and sunsets for the measured low points in stellarium at 1 AD, which would be latter half of the Archaic period. I converted the terrestrial measurements to celestial declination, and sites within 3 degrees of exact solstice declination were considered positive. A control group of non-rock art habitations and limited activity sites were also measured. So this is more or less the geographic distribution. Obviously, there are not 203 sites listed. Some of these sites have a number of them very close to each other, but they typically were close either to the Colorado River. Mill Creek had quite an accumulation of sites, and Cane Creek was another large area. The sites in this northern section were often pictographs. Behind this label is Sago Canyon. And many of the sites in this north west section were pictographs. Almost all of the sites in this section down here were petroglyphs. So I was measuring the low points. These are both panoramic photos taken from in front of a petroglyph panel. The camera does distort this somewhat, but you can see that it's pretty obvious in a canyon environment where the low points are. In measuring the low points, when there's tablelands here, so some of the horizons are fairly low for a while. This was a summer solstice taken in front of a petroglyph site. And even though I measured the entire gap as potential site of a summer solstice sunrise, what I found was that often the exact sunrise was where the angle of the horizon changed steeply. And I think this is quite important because not only were they able to measure exactly where it was, I mean, this is a corner essentially, but they could have used it in an environment in which they had no calendars or other timekeeping devices. They could have used this to say, if sunrise were here, we're still a couple weeks away from actual solstice sunrise. And that's really important if you're trying to meet other people that you don't see on a daily basis. So I found that quite an interesting phenomena. The control group consisted of an abundance of natural rock shelters, lithic scatter, pit house depressions, and limited rock walls and granaries. And these are the results. So these are the non-rock art sites. This is my control group. And because so few sites were included in this study, I combined both rising and setting. So winter solstice sunrise occurs here, and summer solstice sunrise occurs here. And there was a slight bump around this. 3 of these 4 sites are actually within a few hundred meters of each other. So I'm depending on how somebody else would see that, that might be considered one area. In contrast to the control group, this is what I gathered from petroglyph sites, and these are only the eastern horizon low points. So when the sun is at winter solstice, it remains at 23.3 degrees declination all day long. So the sunrise is at 23.3, and the sunset is also, oh, I'm sorry, winter is minus 23.3, and sunset is still minus 23.3 declination. So I've divided these two up into 2 graphs. So these are the winter solstice sunrise. The 19 sites that are here are within 1 degree. So the center of this bar is exact 1 degree on either side. These are 2-degree bins. Within 3 degrees then is an additional 9 on this side and 13 on this side. The summer solstice also had a little bit of a bump. And these are the sunset sites at petroglyphs. So this is the winter solstice here, and this is the summer solstice right here, the 6th. So as you can see, there is a significant difference between the control group and the petroglyph group. These are divided into percentages and numbers. So the archaic sites that I had that met the repatination criteria were 123. Of those, 38 were winter solstice sunrise. Winter solstice sunset was 7, and summer solstice sunrise is 9, and summer solstice sunset is 16. So the number of panels for this same group of 123 sites was 259. And of those, there were 83 at winter solstice sunrise sites, 53 at winter solstice sunset. So those numbers are then translated into percentages here. This is the summary of the non-rock art sites. And then I also took a separate section, looked at the 15 sites that were located in salt valleys. So of these 123, 15 were located in salt valleys, and this is the breakdown of where they were. So if geology and the collapsed salt valleys had been a huge influence, this number, let's look at the percentages, this number would be very much higher than this number. And this number would also be quite high because winter solstice sunrise and summer solstice sunset would have been emphasized. So the fact that these were not emphasized is for me an indication that it was not a major factor. And also that there were only 15 sites that actually would have been subject to that influence. At an earlier point in the study, I also created scatter plots. So the data for the declination graph required that only one of the points be graphed. This shows all the points that were measured. And this is summer solstice sunrise. This is winter solstice sunrise. And here are the sunset measurements on the western horizon, with winter and summer being here. So one of the issues that came up is I felt like the criteria I had developed for quantifying what was a solstice site may have been much more specific than what the early hunter-gatherers considered. And I think they were looking for more of a sensual experience. The value of a low point in the horizon, in contrast to, say, a mountain peak, is that in the high desert, it can be very cold at night. It can be, minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that early sunlight is actually an incredible survival tool, especially if you're standing on a rock face that protects you from the north wind. So when I was looking for sites, I expected to find notches in the horizon like this. This one was not considered positive for me because the actual low points are over here beneath these blue bars. So this failed, or was a negative result. And the altitude you're looking at here is basically between 5 and 8 degrees altitude. What I later did, because it seemed this area was important to them, I drove along the Potash Road and took measurements every half mile. And this is what the opposite horizon looks like. It starts at about 32 degrees at the portal. You drive into the canyon, and the section we just looked at in the photograph is between 5 and 8 degrees. So the opposite horizon becomes very low, and there is almost a kilometer of petroglyphs along this whole expanse. Quite a number of sites. And then right where the horizon goes up again, as you enter a narrower section of the canyon, and this is along the Colorado River. This whole section has no petroglyphs, and then all of a sudden it opens up at Gold Bar, and there's 2 more petroglyph sites there. And then over here at the end of the road is Jug Handle and a couple more sites where the opposite horizon once again drops down. So I think this is a good argument that even though only 2 of these 9 sites met my criteria, I think that the experience of that sunlight during the winter was valued, even if it took an extra 10 or 12 minutes for it to arrive in this section, as opposed to hours for it to come up over this higher opposite horizon. I also looked into what may be some intervisibility. So many of the petroglyphs in the Cane Creek area are deep in canyons and don't see winter solstice sunrise until 10:30, 11, or even 12 o'clock. But what I noticed is the first summer or winter solstice sunrise can be seen fairly early on what is known as birthing stone. And from there is intervisibility to the owl panel. There's a broad terrace in front of it from which you can see false Kiva. Moab Maiden is up at the top between some fins. This is at the base of essentially Tombstone Rock. So this gets very late sunrise, but there's also intervisibility, and it may have been a community event to communicate between these different panels when the winter solstice sunrise occurred. This is also one of the known sites for pit houses in the Moab area. So getting back to the larger picture, I was going to reiterate that the importance of knowing the solstice was that the hunter-gatherers may have considered this entire region home, and it was too big to memorize. Like the Hopi would have a large slab north of their village, and they all knew you go there and you look at the horizon, and that's where you measure where the sun is rising now, and that's your calendar. But in a homeland such as this, you couldn't possibly memorize all the different positions. And so the most simple way of marking those was to mark them with petroglyphs. And that would allow people to know, for one thing, where to meet other people, where the petroglyphs are, and they would also know when to meet them, because if the sun is rising in that gap, then it's almost time, or it's time. And if it's not, then you may be going out hunting more pinyon for a while. So because everything was preserved in an oral tradition, it was overwhelming, and they augmented their memories with these petroglyph sites. Smiley talked about how the archaic people were known to gather at winter time, which may be why the winter sites were so important. While they were dispersed all summer for pinyon foraging, hunting, they gathered in the winter, probably for trading and marriages and potentially even just warmth. It's fascinating to me to think about living in a place like this, where there's no center, like there's no, all of the land is sacred, all of the land is home, and it's, the whole life was very movement oriented. And also that the entire environment is their community. I mean, even in their legends, most Native Americans legends speak of brothers and sisters as parts of the environment, be it animals or places, or astronomical, celestial beings or things. What we consider things were alive to them and part of their community. As they say, all are relations. So tracking solar movements, you're looking for the sun in this little gap here, for example, where the petroglyphs are down here. And here's another example where the winter solstice sunrise would occur at this point. And they could have watched the sun slowly rising every day a little closer to that point. And that would give them a way of estimating how much longer it would take for other people to show up. I also considered how much of their life was nomadic, how walking was their way of being, and that the sun walking across the horizon as it moves between summer and winter may have been something they felt a harmony with. And that they may have chosen to have their winter gatherings at the time when the sun becomes temporarily stationary. So the Navajo language, according to Wallace Stegner, is a language of verbs. And it occurred to me that our language, our Indo-European languages, are very noun-based and thing-based. And a lot of our lives revolve around possessions. And a nomadic people would not. They would perceive everything as action, and they would also not prioritize things which need to be carried. So that footprints occur and that moving wildlife occur in their imagery is a reflection of seeing everything as moving. And not, I mean, we think of inanimate things that we've been told by science are inanimate, the sun, the moon. But for somebody that doesn't have that background, those things are all moving. And essentially the only thing that may have been in the Native American archaic world that didn't move was the North Star. So it's an entirely different perspective. And I think we need to consider the possibility that the sun was a moving, sacred being. And it would have been hard for them to conceptualize it as inanimate because it was walking along the horizon just as they were. In a land of rock and sun, the combination of the sunrise coming over the horizon, maybe coming between two rocks and illuminating the petroglyphs, which at least in Africa were considered to be supernatural beings, and in Australia as well, that these sacred places, the sunrise would have constituted a theophany, a union of the two quintessential elements of that environment, the rock and sun. The land and sky, science has taught us that, you know, the cosmos is way out there, it's far away, it's very distant. But that's not a perception that is available to non-scientific minds. And they would have seen them as more interwoven. And there are studies that, you know, the Siberian theology and ontologies also very much felt that the land and sky are interwoven. But in the environment we have, it is also very sculptural. So, you know, the fins and the arches and all of that are somewhat interwoven as well. It's not like a flat plane. As I mentioned, the wind, the stones, the water, the sun are all moving, they're all animated, and the entire environment is interrelated and sacred. And walking is being. So I think they saw the moon and sun as walking through their environment. In an environment like that, could you even conceptualize rocks as being inanimate? They do fall from time to time here, so it's possible even to see them as alive. So in conclusion, I'd like to say some portion of the petroglyphs created by hunter-gatherer peoples were placed as backsites for viewing solstice events, especially winter solstice sunrise. The pragmatic value would have allowed migratory groups to establish places for gathering and a means to measure the approaching time to solstice. Pervasive Native American anthologies that see all aspects of the world as conscious and animate would lead one to conclude that hunter-gatherer groups celebrated the turning of the sun as a theophany between sun and stone that are the essence of the high desert and the foundation of the Native American community, referred to as all their relations. Thank you so much. I hope that you have enjoyed this talk.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I'm sure. Oh, Karen has her hand up. And then it went
No, I
down.
was just clapping.
Oh, you were clapping. So I have one quick question. Um, did your study you actually went to 139 sites? Is that what I saw on the slide? You're on mute, just by the way.
I went to 203 sites.
203 sites.
So that's sites as I define them, with 10 meters in between them.
Mm-hmm.
So some of these sites, Hidden Valley may be one that's familiar to you, is there are what I consider main panel that may have been the original site. And then you go along the cliff face, and another 20 feet away is another section of petroglyphs, and then another 20 feet away is another section of petroglyphs. So because they had more than 10 meters between them, I define them as different sites.
And these were all previously documented sites, or did you find any as you were out?
I found,
Or
yeah.
are you were pretty much aware of what you were looking for when you went out, right?
Yes and no. Sometimes I had heard that there were sites in an area. I went to one place 5 times to find something that somebody had told me about. And it turned out, and it was even on the map at the trailhead, right? It says, this is where the ancient art is. Ancient art on that trail is actually the name of a climbing route. So there was a lot of trial and error, and the BLM has listed, so of the sites that I went to, only about 7 are considered sacrifice sites by the BLM, that they let anybody know where they are. So at times I've gone hiking with a friend who works as a guide in the area. But in many instances, I just knew there's sites in Mill Creek. So I would hike up and down Mill Creek, use binoculars, and look for things. And yeah, I've definitely found things that others have not. I have yet to use my theory to find a site that is not documented. So you can kind of reverse engineer it by looking, for example, at a horizon on the solstice, and seeing where the sunlight hits first on a cliff face, for example. And I'm trying to figure out if I can go to that place and find petroglyphs.
Joyce Clark asked, let me pull that up. Will the play of light and shadow on the petroglyphs make them seem to move, and thus they were alive?
I like your thinking. And yes, maybe not so much at sunrise, but I discovered because it's so hot to hike here in the summer in August, I went to one site, and it was towards sunset, and it quickly got too dark to really see the petroglyphs. And we ended up getting out flashlights and illuminating petroglyphs with flashlights. And it was so much more obvious what the petroglyphs were. I'd really love to do a series of taking pictures using a spotlight at night. But what I really could imagine based on that experience was that if you had a fire as part of your celebration at night that cast flickering light on petroglyph panels, they would absolutely look like they were moving.
Chris, you have a question, looks like?
Me? I do have a question. You mentioned a panel with some cupules in them. Are those cupules on the vertical face?
Yeah.
And
so the ones on the vertical face that I showed you are on Cane Creek Road, and there's very high cliffs across the river. So it's optimal for the acoustics, for sound. The other ones are on maybe a 60 or 70 degree boulder slope. So it's a boulder in a overhang in the Mill Creek area, and it has an opposing cliff, it's vertical. I would say maybe maximum 200 feet away. So also those two especially made me think about the acoustics and, celebrating on a multi-sensory.
okay.
Yeah.
And they're definitely, so they're steep. There's no way they'd be used for anything else. I mean,
They were not grinding.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't see them being used for grinding. And I also, the ones that I have in the photograph are 90 degrees. And my association with like offerings is they would have had every opportunity to do it in something that was horizontal.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, to other people who live in the Southwest, obviously none of these sites were chosen because there was a lack of rocks around, right?
Okay.
I do have a question for you. What is Skycam Aviation?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm still at work. So that's the company I work for.
Oh,
Where
okay.
we do remote sensing. So
Okay.
I'm on a work computer. So
Okay. If firelight, okay. Can I see that again? The chat. I need to find the chat.
The comment said, Joyce again, if firelight made them move and thus alive, would their placement together be important, possibly as association or narrative?
I believe there are narratives. I feel like without knowing their language, it would be hard for me to reconstruct that. So I've like stepped back from making interpretations about what those, but they feel like narrative. And I know that Carol Patterson has worked extensively with Clifford Duncan, a Ute Indian from and he basically says they're all narratives. And he has interpreted a number of panels for her as narratives. There was a very interesting study that I came across about the San in South Africa. And it talked about how they believed the spirits or the petroglyph figures lived in the rock and would come forth. And I went about 5 or 6 times to some petroglyphs that are not far from where I live. And, late afternoon in the middle of summer sun, another time it was foggy, when looking for a winter solstice. And I took photographs over and over again and looked at these petroglyphs under all these different weather conditions. And every time I went, I would see different ones. And like the first time I couldn't see them. And when the lighting was more subdued, suddenly I could see them. And it seemed much more dynamic than I would have anticipated. And gave me an appreciation for that sense of them being alive, or, you know, emerging from the rock of their own being.
It's like Kim has something he wants to.
I think Iza already knows how impressed I am with her study, its originality. She's really, as I think all of us realize, she has really been breaking entirely new ground. Patination is something we haven't used in archaeoastronomy in terms of dating in the past. And there are other interesting features, like the elevation of the observers. They seem to want to catch a view of the sun as soon as possible, and they are elevated above the floor of the valley. Is that, do you find many of them where they have really put themselves up on exposed narrow ledges so they can catch the first view of the rising sun?
Yes. There are a few spots. One I was not able to include because I didn't dare go up there.
Yes.
I have a friend who's much better at that than I am, but I've had the sense that there was almost a competition, like among young men, who could get to the first light on that day. And, you know, they would go further and further up the hillside. But I also know that, especially attending the winter solstice sunrises that I've gone to witness, the sun couldn't come fast enough.
Yes.
It's so cold out there. And I think that's a really important distinction between I mean, I've read some of the things of how these things were tracked in Mesoamerica and how often they used mountains. And I wouldn't stand at the base of a mountain for anything in the winter here.
So the other interesting innovation is this issue of the importance of backsight.
Yeah.
I think many of the alignments or orientations that we encounter amongst the Southwest often ignore the importance of a backsight. And you really can't get an orientation unless you have a place that indicates where you need to stand. And many of the people studying, many of the observers of rock art just look at the sun touching the rock art, but they don't turn around and observe how many times have people turned around when they've been looking at rock art and observed the horizon, observe where the sun is coming up. I think that's a very important technique that we should encourage future researchers to investigate.
And probably much less subjective.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I feel like the essence of my research has been what could have been the simplest way for them to see the sunrise or record the sunrise. And part of my thinking is that science makes us very specialized in our thinking, and it's been a real journey to open up to the whole horizon or the whole landscape instead of just focusing on, you know, a petroglyph or specific site like that. So it's a combination of looking at the whole thing and what was the simplest approach to looking for a solstice sunrise with their tools.
Yeah, my own experience in Chaco has been the site that we call the Sun Rock or the Piedra del Sol, where there is a spiral and a pyramid rock on the horizon, and the pyramid will produce a shadow on the spiral. And I first thought that was the important thing, the appearance of the shadow on the spiral, such as what happens in Fajada Butte. But if you turn around, the situation is much better, much changed. You can see the drama of the sun rising over the top of the rock. You can see the incredible drama of the sun moving up along the edge of the rock, which itself strikes me as a very sacred and unique experience. So that, again, looking at the rock is important, but it's also important to turn around and look at the sky where some kind of sun interaction on the rock is occurring. So I think you've given the field of archaeoastronomy a number of new methodological ideas in investigation of rock art.
Thank you. I really appreciate everyone joining today to hear this and support my.
And thank you very much for coming and presenting to us.
Yeah, and I would like to invite you to visit our website. Maybe consider becoming a member of our little society.
I'll do that. It's on my to-do list. I need to join societies.
Okay, with that, I think we're about ready to wrap it up here tonight. I just had one little announcement, and maybe some others do, just to make sure everybody remembers. This coming Saturday evening at 6 o'clock Mountain Daylight Time, I'll be giving a presentation over at the Bears Ears Education Center. A program called the Envisioning a Cultural Landscape, which will be more about our Cultural Landscape Survey program. The link is available on the Bears Ears website, and I'll send out an announcement to our contact list. So get on our contact list real quick.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
All right.
All right, guys. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Bye.
Yes.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.